The evening sky carries a kind of wisdom that the day often hides, and as the years pass, we begin to understand this more deeply. There is a quiet truth in the hours before sleep, a truth that reveals itself only when we slow down enough to notice how our bodies and minds respond to the world we move through. In this episode, we return to a conversation with one of Japan's most respected physicians, a man whose life has stretched across eras, wars, scientific revolutions, and cultural shifts, yet whose mind remains centered and unshaken. His long career is not defined merely by age, but by a philosophy of care that honors both the science of the body and the subtle language of daily habits. He reminds us that the way we prepare for sleep is not simply a set of tasks, but a form of communication with our own brain. For many adults over 60, it is easy to fall into the belief that sleep is automatic, as if the body enters rest the moment the lights go off. Yet this is far from how the brain functions. Rest is not an on-off mechanism. It is a process shaped by signals, nutrients, and emotional cues. When these cues are weak or absent, the brain does not descend into deep, restorative rhythms. Instead, it slips into a state of guarded rest, hovering between wakefulness and true repair. This is why so many people wake feeling heavy, foggy, or older than they felt the day before. The transition between day and night becomes more fragile with age, and the brain becomes increasingly dependent on the environment we create leading up to sleep. The doctor speaks often about this transition, describing it as a moment when the body listens most closely to how we treat it. A rushed night, a skipped meal, a screen glowing late into the evening, each of these sends a disruptive signal, telling the brain that it must remain alert, ready, cautious. But when we end the day with consistency and warmth, the brain interprets this as permission to unwind its defenses and begin the work of restoring clarity, memory, and emotional balance. These subtleties matter deeply after 60, when the rhythms of the body shift and the brain's need for comfort and stability grows stronger. So today, we focus on one essential step that should never be overlooked before sleep, a step that is deceptively simple yet foundational to cognitive strength. It is a gesture that many people treat as optional, a final moment of care that is quietly erased by distractions, fatigue, or habit. Yet this small act holds the potential to shape how the brain functions through the night and how sharp, present, and steady we feel the next morning. As we explore this guidance from a century-old physician who has spent his life observing the aging mind, we uncover not just a recommendation, but an invitation to end the day with intention and to give the brain exactly what it needs to stay vibrant, capable, and strong in the years ahead. Sleep, the doctor often says, is not an empty span of hours but a living process in which the brain becomes more active, not less. While the body lies still, the mind steps into its nightly labor, sorting through memories, strengthening neural pathways, and sweeping away the residue accumulated from the day. It is a workshop with tasks that cannot be postponed, but the quality of that work depends entirely on the conditions we set before drifting off. When the evening unfolds without nourishment, calm, or intention, the brain enters the night unprepared, much like a craftsman arriving at his bench to find his tools scattered, the room dim, and no clear guidance on what should be done. The doctor explains that many adults, especially those over 60, unknowingly deprive their brain of the cues it needs to initiate deep restoration. These cues are subtle: a warm sensation in the stomach, a steady breathing pattern, a softened environment, a sense of emotional closure to the day. Without them, the mind becomes uncertain. It does not know whether the night will be restful or stressful, whether hunger or tension will interrupt, whether the environment is safe enough for repair to begin. Instead of turning to its intricate work, filing experiences, repairing mental structures, reinforcing emotional balance, the brain shifts into a state of caution. It stays partially alert, conserving energy rather than investing it in rejuvenation. For seniors, this pattern is especially harmful. As the years progress, the brain becomes more sensitive to disruptions in rhythm and environment. What once required little effort now depends heavily on routine. A cold, late-night snack, a day with no transition at dusk, a television humming too close to bedtime, each of these may seem small, yet they send conflicting messages to the brain. And the brain, receiving no clear instruction, chooses safety over restoration. It lingers in shallow cycles of sleep, unable to commit fully to the deep, reparative stages that preserve memory and clarity. This nightly deprivation does not feel dramatic or alarming at first. In fact, it often goes unnoticed. A morning of mild fog, a momentary lapse, a misplaced object, these are dismissed as ordinary signs of aging. But as the doctor emphasizes, they are often signs of cumulative neglect. When the brain spends night after night without the cues that initiate its repair mode, the consequences settle quietly into daily life. The mornings become heavier. Recalling names takes a beat longer. Concentration fade. And beneath these shifts grows a quiet worry, the unsettling belief that the mind is slipping away faster than expected. Yet the doctor points out that in many cases, the decline is not rooted in irreversible aging but in the absence of preparation. The brain is capable of extraordinary renewal well into later years, but it cannot activate that potential on an empty signal. To rebuild, it needs nourishment, safety, warmth, and rhythm. Without them, the workshop winds down before it truly begins. And so, the path to clearer mornings often starts not with complicated interventions, but with a single deliberate choice made in the final moments of the day. The doctor often reflects on the countless individuals he has treated over his long career, but there was one elderly patient whose story stayed with him more than most. The man had spent his life as a meticulous planner, a teacher, a mentor, and a man known for his steady mind. Yet over the course of several months, he found himself drifting into a haze he could not explain. His mornings were no longer crisp. They felt heavy and disorganized. Keys misplaced, appointments forgotten, names slipping just out of reach. Each moment was a reminder that something in his inner world had begun to falter. He arrived at the clinic with quiet concern, carrying the fear that his aging mind was beginning a permanent decline. During their conversation, the doctor discovered that in an effort to follow modern health trends, the man had adopted a rigid rule of avoiding all food after a certain hour. He believed he was doing something beneficial for his longevity, unaware that his brain, particularly at his age, was more sensitive to long periods without nourishment. Instead of providing his mind the stability it needed to enter deep rest, he was sending it into the night with no warmth, no support, and no reassurance. What he thought was discipline had become deprivation, but not in a dramatic or painful way, rather in a way that subtly undermined his mental clarity. The doctor recommended a gentle shift, not a strict regimen or new medication. He proposed a small, warm nighttime ritual that required almost no effort. A light broth, a soft protein, or a comforting sip of something warm, paired with slow breathing that relaxed the nervous system and a few minutes of stillness to close the day. This was not about eating more. It was about sending the right signal. It was about reminding the brain that it was safe to let go of vigilance and enter the deep phases of restoration that keep memory resilient. The patient embraced this simple routine, unsure at first whether something so small could make any difference. But within a few weeks, the transformation was unmistakable. His mornings regained clarity. The fog that once settled over his thoughts began to lift. He felt present again, attentive, calm, and aware of his surroundings in a way that felt familiar rather than distant. The change did not come from a miracle pill or an intense intervention. It came from honoring what the brain had been quietly asking for all along, a sign of comfort, nourishment, and rhythm at the end of the day. This experience reminded the doctor that people often underestimate the influence of subtle daily choices. It reminded the patient that caring for the mind does not always require grand actions. And it reminds all of us that the most meaningful improvements often begin with a small, compassionate ritual, one that acknowledges the needs of a brain that has carried us through decades and now asks for a bit of intentional care in return. The doctor often notes that a turning point occurs in the brain around the later decades of life, a shift that is subtle but deeply influential. Past 60, the nervous system responds more strongly to disruption and becomes more reliant on cues that once seemed optional. Changes in circulation, hormone regulation, and metabolic rhythm make the brain more reactive to any sense of imbalance. When blood flow rises and falls too quickly or cortisol remains elevated from daily tension, the mind does not enter the deeper stages of rest as easily. And when long gaps without nourishment occur, the brain interprets them not as healthy restraint but as a signal that it must protect itself through the night. Instead of devoting energy to strengthening memory pathways or clearing toxins, it shifts into conservation. This is why so many older adults feel mentally strained even after a full night in bed. He explains that memory consolidation, the act of stabilizing the experiences and information gathered throughout the day, is one of the brain's most energy-dependent tasks. This process requires steady internal conditions, calmness in the nervous system, stable blood sugar, and a sense of safety. If the body is tense, underfueled, or unsettled, the brain delays this essential work. The result is not an immediate crisis but a gradual erosion of clarity. The details of conversations fade more quickly. Tasks feel heavier. Thoughts take longer to arrange. None of this stems from a lack of potential. It stems from the absence of an internal environment that supports renewal. In traditional Japanese perspectives on wellness, the unity between mind and body is not philosophical rhetoric but daily practice. Harmony is expressed through small gestures, a warm drink in the evening, slow breathing that widens the diaphragm, dimming lights to soothe the senses, or taking a quiet moment to acknowledge gratitude. These actions may appear simple, yet they function as signals that reach the brain's emotional centers. They tell the limbic system that the day's responsibilities have ended, that there is nothing left to defend against, and that the body is safe to descend into deeper restorative patterns.
Contemporary research echo this wisdom.
Studies show that consistent pre-sleep rituals significantly reduce evening cortisol, increase parasympathetic activity, and allow heart rate variability to settle into a healing rhythm. These physiological shifts are not trivial. They dictate whether the brain enters shallow, fragmented rest or sinks into the slow wave and REM phases that replenish memory and cognition. A warm meal eaten too late or too early can disrupt this balance. Screens used too close to bedtime override natural melatonin production. Long periods of fasting trigger metabolic alarms that the brain must prioritize over repair. The doctor emphasizes that timing and consistency matter as much as the habits themselves. When actions are repeated at the same point each evening, the brain begins to anticipate restoration. It prepares itself, calibrating hormones, adjusting circulation, and aligning its internal clock. Over time, these patterns create a dependable pathway into restorative rest. And when the pathway is consistent, the brain spends the night rebuilding rather than resisting, restoring rather than guarding, and strengthening rather than slipping. The doctor speaks of the evening ritual with a softness that reflects its purpose. To him, it is not a discipline or a demand but an offering, a way of acknowledging the body's long day of service and preparing it for the quiet work that follows in the night. He explains that the foods chosen during this time hold meaning beyond their nutritional value. A small bowl of warm miso broth or a delicate portion of tofu is enough to tell the nervous system that nourishment is available, that there is no need for alarm, and that the night will not be spent in a state of scarcity. Even a soft-boiled egg or a tender piece of fish provides the amino acids the aging brain needs to maintain its nightly repair cycle. The warmth of these foods is part of the medicine, relaxing the digestive system and easing the transition into rest. He stresses that the environment in which these small foods are consumed matters just as much as the foods themselves. Light has a profound effect on the mind, and bright screens distort the brain's internal clock. When lights are lowered, when the chatter of electronics fades, and when the house itself settles into a slower rhythm, the body interprets this as a sign that the day is drawing to a close. A single candle's glow or the cool drift of outside air through a slightly open window can do more to calm the spirit than many people realize. These cues speak directly to the emotional centers of the brain, telling them that nothing urgent remains, that the world has softened, and that it is safe to release tension. Movement, he adds, plays a quiet but essential role in preparing for sleep. This is not the time for intense exercise or complicated stretches, but for gentle motions that unwind the posture the day has imposed. A slow rotation of the shoulders, a soft loosening of the neck, or the easing of the hips signals to the body that it can let go of accumulated stress. These movements encourage circulation without stimulating alertness, allowing the muscles to lengthen and the nervous system to lower its guard. And then comes the final part of the ritual, a moment of gratitude. Whether written on paper or spoken silently, this practice has a grounding effect on the mind. Gratitude shifts attention away from unfinished tasks and lingering concerns. It reminds the brain of stability, connection, and small sources of joy that often go unnoticed. The doctor notes that this emotional shift, though subtle, prepares the mind to rest in a state of ease rather than agitation. When paired with warmth, soft light, gentle movement, and a consistent rhythm, gratitude becomes the final doorway into restorative sleep. He emphasizes that none of these steps require effort or complexity. They are not meant to transform the evening into a ceremony, but to create a landscape where the brain feels supported. In this landscape, the mind can retreat from the noise of the day and settle into the deeper currents of night, where healing, renewal, and clarity take place. For anyone beginning this practice tonight, the doctor offers a simple sequence. Warm something nourishing, breathe slowly, stretch gently, and choose 3 things that brought you gratitude today, even if they are small. This is enough to shift the mind from protection to restoration. Consistency transforms these moments from actions into rhythm, and rhythm becomes the foundation of mental clarity. He reminds us that memory does not fade because we grow older. It fades because we rush, neglect, or forget to support the brain at the moment it needs us most. The night is not merely the end of the day, it is the beginning of tomorrow's clarity. When we choose to feed the mind, to calm it, and to prepare it with intention, we give it the strength to remember us in return. And as always, the invitation is simple. End the day gently, and let the brain do what it was made to do: restore, rebuild, and renew.